Is there a reason you chose fitness in particular as opposed to kind of, doing anything else?
I chose fitness because it was inspiring. I was an athlete. And because I became literally obsessed with comeback stories, I realized that all this darkness, trauma, pain, anxiety, depression, all this stuff was just going to fuel me. So I would tell myself repeatedly in my head that this is part of my comeback story. This is part of my comeback story. And like I would just say this over and over. So when things would happen in life, I would just say, awesome, challenge accepted. What's up? And I would just change my narrative. And my friends were like, dude, what are you on? And I would just tell them, like, if I don't do this, I'm going to go backwards. So I have to. And they didn't get it because I didn't tell them the details, but I just felt it. And I was like, I have to speak this way out loud unto others, because if not, I'm going to drift and become somebody else. So I just stuck with that.
The following is a conversation with Derick Johnson. Derick is a U.S. Army veteran, life coach, and trainer that has helped over 500 clients and 50 companies go from just surviving to thriving through his coaching modalities and marketing efforts. Derick comes from a mixed family, and growing up in the South, he saw hate from both sides, but used it as fuel along with his dark upbringing in a home of alcoholism and rage. Derick used fitness as an escape and quickly was able to stay calm in most moments when people would just break down or snap. He used these experiences to thrive in the U.S. Army and in his coaching career. Derick healed himself and now teaches others to do the same. Here's our conversation. Derick, thanks for coming on the podcast, my man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Daniel. Pleasure being here.
Of course. And before we get started, I wanted to say thank you for your service. You are a military veteran, so we really appreciate you and kind of all the active duty out there. So thanks again for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
On that note, I have a pretty good place to start. So as I mentioned, you're an Army veteran, a life coach, and I might add an absolute stud of a human being. So
I appreciate it.
Really a fun background, but a good place to start. I know in your backstory, you come from a mixed household, and unfortunately growing up, you experienced a lot of hate from both sides. What was that like?
Yeah, so my father, he's African-American. He was U.S. Army for 25 plus years. My mother's German. She was a kindergarten teacher for 40 plus years. So growing up as a child in Germany, we lived on a military base. And then I went to kindergarten
Mm-hmm.
in Deutschland and Germany. And so my mother at home, she only spoke German to me. So the older I got, I realized she just wanted to make sure I didn't forget the language, which was awesome because most mixed people, especially military families, they can't speak to the other half of the family. They have to wait on a family member to translate. So it was interesting. So we had the education at home, the discipline at home. Both of my parents were always up at 4 or 5 a.m. exercising. So kids do as they see, not what they're told. So that's what I saw. And I was like, hey, let's do it. So it just ran in our families. So it was interesting growing up in Germany. But before you move to the States, all Europeans, they always look up how it's going to be moving to America. And they're like, is it like the movies? So I was curious. I was like, I wonder if school's going to be like that. Bullying, jocks, cheerleaders, et cetera, the American sitcom and the American movie. And it's 1,000% like that.
Mm-hmm.
So once we moved to America when I was in third grade, I was like, well, shit, this is real. So I was getting bullied at school because people didn't really know what I was at first. So when we moved to the States, we moved to Pensacola, Florida, which is in the panhandle of Florida on the Gulf of Mexico. Some people, they probably don't know what it is, but it's near Panama City Beach in Destin, Florida.
Got it.
So beautiful beaches, beautiful area, but a lot of the mentality, it's pretty closed. Beautiful city, but it's just got some places in the South. It's like, it is what it is. It's on the Florida-Bama line. But yeah, so a lot of people didn't know what I was. So I was getting bullied at school for speaking too white, for looking too this. People thought I was Mexican, like all these different things. And it was just a culture shock because in Germany at the time as a child, I didn't experience that. Same thing on military bases because everybody is around different ethnicities and cultures. So it was just the norm for us. So yeah, so it was just a culture shock moving from Germany to the United States based off of that. And I knew that I was not the issue. It was just all an internal thing. And I always did a lot of reading and researching. And I realized that a lot of people were just continuing what they were what they were raised and taught to do. So I couldn't really be mad after a while. But at first it was a shock and I was like, what is going on? But I had to adjust and go from there.
Yep, for sure. It's also when you're young, and I'm sure you probably are well aware of this, but it's hard to have emotional maturity at a young age because you're also kind of, your hormones are all developing, and you don't really know what's going on, and you see one behavior and you see another behavior, and you're trying to pick between what's right and wrong. So definitely a tough on that end. But on a quick note, do you still speak German or kind of
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
wow.
I still speak German, still fluent.
I think that's so interesting. So I mean, at least kind of one thing, one educational thing kind of came out of all that. But speaking of the hate that you dealt with as a kid, kind of people might have judged you based on what you looked like, or kind of down south, if people were, for example, very close minded and didn't get a chance to know you because in the first 5 minutes of the show you're like, yeah, I was a mixed family, I speak German. I mean, like, I think that's a lot of really cool and diverse stuff, but as a young kid, certainly definitely hard. So how were you able to cope with all that hate once you moved to Florida?
So I got deep into personal development because growing up, I was a skinny kid. I was bullied. I was insecure. I was scared. I had a really bad stuttering issue. I had bad posture. My shoulders are slumped forward. So complete opposite of the man that I became. So I
Hmm.
was always timid, nervous. And then there's a lot of stuff in my home life going on with my parents and everything. So we'd be up late yelling, screaming, arguing, all the dark stuff because alcoholism runs in my family. So I was getting bullied at home and then at school, and I just said enough was enough. And so my step into personal development was fitness. I
Hmm.
knew that I had to change my physique, my appearance, and my confidence by just first getting into fitness and then working on my mindset. So I picked up every men's health magazine. I picked up Arnold Schwarzenegger's bodybuilding encyclopedia, Bruce Lee's autobiography. I also got into martial arts, and I didn't do it necessarily to fight the bullies. There was one part of me that wanted to take care of business,
Hmm.
but I didn't do that just because of that. I just knew that I was sick and tired of feeling this way. So I made a vow and I made a decision and a promise to myself that I would no longer allow people to control my reactions to things. So it started at home.
Hmm.
So an example would be arguing back, yelling back, going to my room, breaking down, or at school, them seeing that I was offended or trying to fire back at them. And I realized really quickly, if I just play reverse psychology and just give people the opposite of what they expect, then I
Hmm.
can control and own the situation. So besides fitness, training my physique and becoming mentally more confident, that made me calmer for the stressful situations. So I would just start agreeing with people. People are like, hey, you're this. Yeah, you're right. Now what? And I would just keep a blank face and they were like, they wouldn't know where to go because they're like, what else are you going to say? I'll just agree with everything. And so I used to just laugh in my head and I would just keep a blank face. And so it worked really well because people started to realize that I wasn't getting affected by what they were saying, doing, or things of that nature. So it was interesting. And then the older I got, I would just stand up for other people that were bullied because at that point, nobody bullied me anymore. Because in middle school, I finally approached a bully who was bullying myself and other people. And this guy, mind you, this guy was like 6'3", 6'4", 250 in middle school. So like you could just imagine this dude just
Hmm.
beating up everybody. And so since I stood up to him and I embarrassed him in front of everybody, people realized that I did it for them, not so much for myself.
Hmm.
And so nobody had the guts or the balls to stand up for him. So after that, people saw, they're like, wow, he beat him up in front of people, embarrassed him, like took his shirt off because the guy was pretty fat. And like I shook his chest and just said a bunch of outlandish stuff, but I just took out years of anger that everybody wanted to do. And so I just made an example of him because that's how he made like 30 of us feel, males and females.
Hmm.
And so the fitness helped, the mindset helped, but most importantly was not allowing people to control my reaction anymore. So fitness was my gateway and then helping others as well. So I
Hmm.
realized that people would ask me like, hey, who are you? Used to be timid, scared, insecure, sit in the back of the classroom, never raise your hand. And now you're sitting in the front, raising your hand, asking to be in control of the class, public speaking, like all this. They're like, what happened within 2 years? And then I would just tell them, they're like, hey, how can I do that? So I started training people when I was 15 because I just got so inspired by it. But I do believe that people that go through a lot of different traumas, whether that's personal, family, spiritual, they either go one, they continue their path of
Hmm.
destruction, or they change and just find their gift. So I realized that my gift as a child and as a teen was discernment.
Hmm.
So I can meet people where they were at, read the room, read an individual, and then slowly build them up. And I fell in love with that because I would see them in a different headspace and they would be empowered, positive, confident, because I could sense when they were stressed, going through something. Because people who've been through a lot, they can usually tell by somebody's body language, even if
Yep.
they're doing a fake smile or whatever's going on. You're like, I could tell something's going on. But instead of me just asking, like, hey, what's wrong? I would just support people
Yep, I feel that. And I really appreciate a lot of what you shared there. But to go back a bit, I know you said you were exposed to alcoholism as a kid, and you found fitness as kind of a pathway to escape that. Do you think if you hadn't chosen something else, your life would be totally different right now and you might have walked down the wrong path?
Yeah, 100%. Because addictions run on both sides of my family, my father's and my mother's. And so I accepted that, like, this is in my blood. So I made sure not to choose vices that didn't help me in regards to outlet or masking. So
Hmm.
as a teen, I would tell myself, and I'm not, I mean, it is what it is. But I always thought, I was like, one, I'm not taking advice from people I don't want to end up like. Two, is I'm not weak like they are to have to drink my sorrows away or try to mask stuff with drugs, alcohol, porn, etc. Like all the stuff. That's just me as a teen. I was like, I'm not listening to these people. And it didn't mean that I was better than anyone. I just knew what the end result was going to be of mistreating their neighbors, their friends, their kids, etc. I just didn't want the path of destruction. And I realized that a lot of people that do have these vices are just
Hmm.
coping or trying to cope or trying to mask or trying to run from things. So as a teen, I was just angry about it. The older I got, I realized, you know what? People just have bad patterns and they have their own traumatic things, which is why they do what they do in the present moment. So then growing up, I realized that I wanted to help people with that. So essentially nowadays, I help people identify their patterns and
Hmm.
then help them break the ones that aren't serving them so they can feel like they can thrive in all areas and not just be good at this one or two things. And the rest are like, yeah, I'll get around to that. I'll face it one day.
You know,
So
it's
nowadays
incredible.
we face that and work on it.
Yep, for sure. And it's incredible that you're able to help people. And as much as we think, and I think I've said this on a few other episodes, at the end of the day, there's obviously a lot of things we do in life, but it all comes down to a choice. And if you really think about it, whether you start something 5 minutes early or kind of you blow something off, at the end of the day, you can come up with 1,000 excuses, but it's always a choice. And I think that's such a
Oh yeah.
beautiful simplification and a great way that you said it there. But to backtrack a little bit, I know you said you went into fitness as kind of your escape. Is there a reason you chose fitness in particular as opposed to kind of, doing anything else?
Yes, mainly because I was inspired by comeback stories. So I played sports at the time, and my dad always had Rocky on, would have like bodybuilding shows on. I grew up on Rambo, Bloodsport. Basically, grew up on all the alpha male era movies. So
Hmm.
that's what I
Fair enough.
was inspired by. And so there was no agendas pushing these movies. It was just like seeing a man be a husband, be a father, kick some ass. And I was just inspired by that. And so besides just the movies is I would listen to a lot of music of artists that went through their own traumatic things
Hmm.
and I would relate to it. So my friends would be like, hey, Derek, why do you listen to such dark music? But I didn't see it as dark or sad. I just related a bunch to it, but I never told anybody. I was like, oh yeah, it motivates me for workouts, which it did, but they didn't realize that I connected with the relationship that like Eminem had with his mom or
Hmm.
Linkin Park's backstory, like all these different bands or rappers or artists or whoever, I related to their music so much because I was actually going through these things. So that's why it would give me chills, give me a rush, make me teary eyed and all that. And I loved feeling the lyrics or even just if it was a piano or something because it spoke to me. So I said, you know what? There's something interesting here. I'm inspired by these stories. I like the comeback stories. I love learning about the body and mind. I think I'm onto something. And at the time, I didn't realize what path I was going to take. I just realized that I had to do something regarding this because it made me feel good. I could help build up others. So I chose fitness because it was inspiring. I was an athlete. And because I became literally obsessed with comeback stories, I realized that all this darkness, trauma, pain, anxiety, depression, all this stuff was just going to fuel me. So I would
Hmm.
tell myself repeatedly in my head that this is part of my comeback story. This is part of my comeback story. And like I would just say this over and over. So when things would happen in life, I would just say, awesome, challenge accepted. What's up? And I would just change my narrative. And my friends were like, dude, what are you on? And I would just tell them, like, if I don't do this, I'm going to go backwards. So I have to. And they didn't get it because I didn't tell them the details, but I just felt it. And I was like, I have to speak this way out loud unto others because if not, I'm going to drift and become somebody else. So I just stuck with that.
I love how you said that the reason you listened to a lot of this music was because it was really relatable to you. And I think that speaks to a deeper message because a lot of times people will see you listening to a certain artist or a certain song and be like, why are you listening to that? And it's hard because sometimes it's tough to relate to people who haven't gone through those experiences. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
can definitely resonate with you on there. And the other thing that I really like that you said is that you really watched a lot of these comeback stories and a lot of that fueled you. So quick note on there, besides that last night's Super Bowl, what's your favorite comeback story?
Favorite comeback story? I would say, in a spiritual sense, Jesus Christ. If somebody believes or doesn't believe, just they can at least, I know I have a friend who's an atheist and he gets chills when he hears the story. I'm like, I'm not telling you what to believe, whatever you want, but definitely just the story of Father Jesus Christ, what he went through, sacrifice, and just everything with that, because it correlates to sports, it can correlate to business, it can correlate to relationship. Like someone can take something from that story and relate it to themselves or the season that they're in life and see, not that we're comparing ourselves to him, but just in general is the using it as an analogy. It was always very interesting to me. And especially at the time when I was going through a lot, I didn't believe in anything. I was like, why is this happening to kids? Why is this happening to people? I was questioning everything. I would raise my hand in church as that kid, like, wait, how do we know Paul wasn't on drugs? And they're like, why would you say that in church? I was just that kid. I would just ask questions. Like, how am I supposed to believe this? And nobody would ever give me answers. And I'm like, well, why should I listen to these people if they can't give me answers? But then the older and wiser I got, I realized that I said, you know what? It's time for me to do my own research and not just ask everybody questions. So I would definitely say Jesus Christ. And besides that, just artists, Eminem, Marshall Mathers, Slim Shady, however somebody knows him as, is I relate a lot to his story. But I can say that outside of music, entertainment, books, and all that, one of the biggest pivotal moments was I was 11 or 12 years old. And I was in the back seat of my dad's truck. And he would always listen to a lot of self-development tapes, cassette tapes. I'm old enough to know about the cassette tapes. So it was Tony Robbins. And I was just gazing out the window. And out of nowhere, I'm just zoned out, not really even listening. But out of nowhere, he says, if my mother gave me the love that I wanted as a child, I wouldn't be the man I am today. And this was a recording of his live workshop. And I'm like, what? Huh? And then he kept saying it again. And I got chills, teary eyed. And I didn't say anything to my dad, but I was like, who is this guy? He's speaking to me. And then I learned his story of his relationship with his mother. And it was nearly identical to the situation that I had with my mother. Not that I hate her or anything, but it is what it is. It happens for a reason. And so I dove deep into his content, his books, his stuff online and all that. And it just inspired me. And I realized, I said, you know what? Yes, one side of me wants to be a pro athlete. Yes, one side of me wants to be in the army. But I know deep down, I want to change lives like this guy. And I was saying this around 11 or 12. My friend's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I don't know what he does, but I got to figure it out how to do this because he did something to me. And so that right there was one of the most pivotal ones outside of just the information that helped me push through a workout or push through a dark night. Just that moment just woke me up. So I started seeing things in a different perspective after that because I wasn't living in the moment of pain, sorrow, stress, whatever was happening. I could just pop out for a second, look at a higher perspective, look at my younger version being proud of current me and doing a lot of perspective hopping, which was like the cheat code to overcoming things back then and still now, being able to zoom out from ourselves. And step one with that is if somebody has the ability to push pride and ego away, if they can push it out of the side, then they can do some amazing work. If not, this can be a long struggle fest.
Yep, for sure. I can definitely relate to that. But on a quick note that you mentioned, speaking about athletics, and I hope you take this the wrong way, you look like you could be in the UFC. So definitely
Appreciate it.
wave your head up high. But, speaking of one of the things you just said, can relate to that on a very personal note. So, for example, last night was a Super Bowl, and I was on my phone probably an hour longer than I should have been. And I think maybe if I was a little younger, I would have would have justified it being like, oh, whatever, it happens. I was on my phone. It's not my fault. But looking back, I was like, no, like I could have gotten an extra, I could have got an extra hour of sleep or, not have been on my phone or woken up earlier. So can definitely relate to you in that sense. And just broader, I think if people, it's very easy to blame someone else for a lot of the time. There's a lot of the issues in our lives. And don't get me wrong, life is incredibly unfair. A lot of people go through some really unspeakable things. But I think a lot of times what we struggle to do is kind of accept that responsibility. And it's a beautiful thing kind of once you accept that responsibility, how your brain just kind of opens up and,
Oh, yeah.
become a little more creative. But beautiful note on there. And the other thing that I wanted to touch upon, speaking, about the religious story you just gave, there's actually another podcast I was listening to one time. I think Danny Miranda's podcast. He had someone on, I think someone who was also a military veteran. And he said that, sometimes people go to the military, they're atheists, but he said like there's no such thing as an atheist in like a 10-foot digital
Oh
like
yeah.
in the middle of war. So
Yeah.
interesting note on there, and how when our lives are in danger, we kind of I had
Oh yeah.
another
Yeah.
note
They become
here.
believers real quick.
Yeah.
I like that analogy. I say that a lot to my friends and clients in regards to turbulence in an airplane. If
Mhm.
anybody has ever had extreme turbulence, and I mean drop 10,000 feet in 5 seconds, like you just drop, and then the pilot's super calm on the intercom, and everybody's like screaming and yelling, and stuff's flying, and the pilot just knows you're just hitting an air pocket or a cloud or
Mhm.
whatever's happening. And he's all calm. He's all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go through some weather, put the seatbelt on. But in that moment, you can look around, and it's always the people that have like a 666 shirt on or whatever. You can just tell what they're wearing. They're just like, whatever. They're like, oh my God, I'm sorry for everything. And in that moment, they just start believing it. I'm just like, this is amazing. I wish I could record this.
Funny moment for sure. But I appreciate that. And reading your bio, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, speaking about your fitness journey, it helps you become kind of a lot more down and to keep composure when you're in high stress moments, which I know a lot of people struggle with. But if you're advising other people who, and I think probably the average person, when things are really stressful, it's hard for them to make a decision. And you could probably
Yeah.
relate to this, scientifically, when you're stressed out, your brain almost kind of compresses and it's hard to make a decision. So, personally, how would you say you keep composure in high stress moments and kind of use that to make a decision?
So first off, I'm a big component on morning routines.
Hmm.
Is I always aim and I just always motivate or push people to focus on two things in their morning routine. One for the mind, one for the body. So the body could be yoga, Pilates, boxing class, going for a jog, walking their dog, weightlifting. They can choose whatever they like. Two would be one thing for the mind. That could be visualization, prayer, meditation, anything like that, journaling, they can choose. But if they only choose two things with their morning routine, they'll realize that it doesn't take much to get into an empowered state.
Hmm.
So what's popular now is to do like 10 to 15 things. You need an ice bath, then you need to get a sauna, then you need to take 15 vitamins, then you need to do this, then you need to listen to Joe
Impossible.
Rogan for an hour and a half, then you need to meditate, then you need to do conscious meditation, then you need manifestation technique. And it's like, whoa, what are we doing? So choosing two things, one for the mind, one for the body. So with that being said, it just paves the way for the day where I'm in a more proactive state and I say, I need to show up better for others. People depend on me, whether that's clients, somebody down the road, somebody I see in public, somebody online. So showing up and making sure that we're positively affecting people and not negatively infecting them. So we all go through stuff, but how quick can we manage our state when we can zoom out and say, all right, let me not walk into this store yet. Let me reset, breathe, pray, drink some water in the car before I walk in here and start an argument that has nothing to do with them. It's probably all internal. So making sure that we're not that person. So it's easier said than done,
Hmm.
but the individual that can catch themselves. So the morning routine is number one, the staple to being just more calm. And then number two is pausing. I know it sounds so straightforward and direct and simple, but pausing.
Hmm.
So let's just say you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off. Yeah, the initial gut reaction is to yell, flick them off, do whatever. But some people, they carry that anger for 2 or 3 hours or until the night. And they're like, you won't believe what happened this morning at 7. I was driving. And they're still ranting about some
I can
five
relate to
second
that.
interaction with somebody. And they've been holding this energy all day long, just ruining the morale at work on a Zoom call or whatever's happening. But pausing, making sure I have my morning routine set so I'm in a proactive state. And the last but not least is to not take things personal, not take things personal and realize that everybody's human. Some people, even your best friend, he could call you or say something slick or whatever. And then you zoom out and you're like, you know what? This is not in his character. Or if it's a complete stranger, maybe she's going through something really traumatic
Hmm.
and she just doesn't know how to express it. And you're that person there and she just said whatever. And you're like, that was some outlandish stuff. But hey, maybe she's going through something. So it's just controlling your reactions and seeing that sometimes not giving the person a response that they expect gives you power over the situation
Hmm.
and not in a trying to have an upper hand and be the alpha male bravado macho man Randy Savage way, but just
Better for
more so,
yourself.
hey, I'm going to control the morale here and just ask a good question. Hey, everything okay? What's going on? Like, you want to yell together? Let's let it out. Like, I'm that guy that just I can sense when something is up with somebody and I just guide them through a situation. They're like, what's going on? I'm like, let's yell. I can tell you got a lot on your mind. I go, you go. And they're like, what is going on? I'm like, all right, nice to meet you. Fist bump. And I walk away and they're like, what the hell just happened? but I could just sense that something is going on. And I'm going to be that person that says, you know what? If you need to say something to me, let it out. I'm not going to take it personal, but I'm here to just show you that I can be here to listen. So let's let it out and realize that this is just a temporary situation. Let's not allow this energy to dictate the rest of the day and ruin potential opportunities, relationships, etc. So going back to the morning routine, proactive state, pausing. Sometimes I might be just pausing and breathing and not firing back on emotion. And 3, not taking things personal and realizing that not everyone has that level of self-awareness or self-control. And once we accept that, we won't take things as personal, because sometimes people are too offended or triggered when they can see clear as day that this person's going through something, or it's like, hey, it's expected. Their body language before they even walked up, you could tell they were going to do something. So those 3 things definitely help a ton.
Yep, for sure. And there's beauty and simplicity, definitely, that I got there. And I really appreciate you mentioning that. And the other thing that I thought was really cool that you mentioned was to positively affect, not negatively infect. So I'll definitely steal that phrase. But I like the story in the sense that it takes, obviously sometimes people go through stressful moments, and I'm sure I have this in my life and you have it in your life. And afterward, you're like, I don't know why the hell I said that. But
Yeah.
if you're seeing someone do that and then you just kind of do the opposite of their energy and you kind of change their day and then kind of they backtrack, it's a good transaction all around. So I think it's really important, and it's definitely a hard thing to do, but if you can kind of keep yourself on a mentally strong plane, you can really help out those around you. And I think that's one of the things that we could ultimately ask. But another thing that I wanted to touch upon, and as I mentioned earlier, kind of you did serve in the Army, so once again, I'll probably thank you a few times throughout the show for your service. But
Appreciate it.
going back way back when, why did you choose to enroll in the Army?
Honestly, I was a scared little, skinny little, insecure boy, and I knew that I had to face all fears. I had a fear of heights. I
Mm-hmm.
was scared of my dad. I was scared of everything. Luckily, I had a badass dad, and he would like hit me in the chest. I don't mean in an abusive way, but he would just tighten up my form,
Like, come
my
on, get him,
posture.
kid.
Yeah, he's like, why are you standing like that? Like, hey, get your hand. Hey, do this and that. At the time, I'm like, what is going on? Can I not even walk without you doing something? But then the older I got, I realized all that helps so much. The work ethic and everything. So seeing how calm my dad always was in situations like outside the family
Mm-hmm.
just inspired me as well. But deep down, I just knew that the only way for me to become the man that I wanted to become was to face my fears. And I knew the quickest way to do that would be the military. So it started in high school. I was in Army ROTC. So I was still working on myself and all
Mm-hmm.
that. But every Wednesday, we would have to wear the green uniform to school and all that. My buddies would laugh and everything else because they're like, oh, you got to shave your face again. So I was a kid. I kept my stash as a teenager because I had to shave every day.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see the Facebook memories, I'm like, who allowed me to keep that ugly stash? But I wanted to keep that to still be part of myself. But that was my intro into the military, was ROTC. And it helped me a ton to get out of my box, get out of my shell, lead people through PT, which is physical training, learn things, teach people other things in regards to memory. And then I realized that I really fell in love with being able to build somebody up who most people would give up on.
Mm-hmm.
Building up the person that probably came from a broken home, the male or female. And I really fell in love with that because you could tell that nobody was there to support them. Nobody was there to actively listen. And they were just getting dismissed. And so they're seen as a problem child. But I could see the big picture because I was like, I was going to go that route. I didn't become that, but I could sense that I would have been like them. And so that's why I always wanted to build them up. So that was the gateway into the Army. And then in the Army, just facing my fear of heights and just other fears, I realized that it helped me so much. And then in hindsight, thinking back on basic training is besides just fear of heights, when it came to the flip side, I had no fear of drill sergeants being in my face. The reason why my 5'4" German mother would just like scream in my face most of my life, and my 6'3" country boy farmer dad would be in my face just yelling. And so in my head during basic training and boot camp, I would almost laugh when they were in my face yelling because I would just think to myself, my German mom would take all of you out. Like this is a walk in the park. Like I used to have to deal with this every day, every night she was drunk. So seeing the big picture, I was like, huh, they trained me for basic training. They trained me to lead others. And then the gift was from all that stuff in regards to growing up was to help people in a deeper way. So that's a huge reason I chose the Army. Was it inspired me. I knew it would help me overcome my fears. And last but not least, I knew that it would be good on my resume. And it was just a life experience to have a security clearance and have these different memories and skills that I can take on to other areas of life.
Speaking of, one of the things that you mentioned was you joined the Army, and it's great that you got a ton of experience and had, all those things that you just listed, but you said that you did it to face your fears. What were those fears?
Fear of heights was a huge one. And also going backwards and stuttering again. I had a really bad stuttering issue. And I mean, I couldn't even spit out a sentence without stuttering for like 20 seconds. And so in high school, I got better at controlling it. And I knew that anytime I had more stress and anxiety, I would start to stutter more because I was nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew stuttering and a fear of heights were two of the biggest things back then. And I'm like 17. I said, you know what? I have to be put in these situations. It's the only way I'm going to evolve. If not, I'm just going to be that guy that's like just breaking down all the time. And I said, this can't be me. So those are two huge things. And besides that, I didn't really have a fear of war or death or things like that. Just because of wild stuff that I saw growing up and everything, I didn't fear those things. Because some people, they do feel fear the gore, the violence and all that. I just did not fear any of those things. I just feared going backwards, stuttering, going into a low state, and then also the fear of height, of not of death, but of falling off something, or just being scared in a helicopter when the doors open, you're flying, your legs are dangling, like all these different experiences, jumping out of helicopters and planes. But once you faced it and you get the adrenaline rush and you're back on the ground, you see life in a new light. Like nobody realizes the light that you see life as after you jumped out of a plane or helicopter and you're still alive and you're like, all right, I'm still here. Something just clicks.
Yeah.
And you're grateful for more things. You thank God. Your faith goes skyrockets up. It gets stronger. So it's amazing what happens.
Yep. No atheist in the wartime, as we said earlier. But
Oh yeah.
thinking of kind of, I don't know if you were ever in hand-to-hand combat. I know a lot of people probably go in and are very nervous, but once you're in that moment, does everything just kind of fade away and you just kind of accept the outcome? You just do your best and accept whatever happens?
Yeah. So honestly, it's all training. It's all subconscious. So if somebody's been in martial arts, and I don't just mean like MMA, going to the gym, everybody wears tap out shirts, they're in 3 months, but actual martial arts school where the sensei has been doing it for 40 plus years and is a calm individual. And so at an actual dojo, is they know the energy there is so calm. So now, like I watch UFC, I watch MMA, but outside of those new age gyms that is just like blasting music and it's just like, oh, testosterone. Real martial artists are the most calm individuals. And so if somebody has that experience, then they know that fighting and violence is last resort. The male or female that is actually a black belt and knows martial arts are the calmest. And so I didn't mention it earlier, but one of my favorite sports growing up, I started in middle school, was Tang Soo Do, which is a form of Taekwondo and karate. It's translated to China Handwei, but it's a style of kickboxing. And that helped me so much, not in regards to violence or fighting the bullies, but controlling and harnessing my energy. So what my sensei would do, which really stood out to me, was he could sense when I was angry and really stressed. And he never asked a question. He could sense something was going on at home, but he never asked because he knew I wouldn't say anything. And so what he would do, he's like, hey, I'm glad you're here. Go teach the kids class. And he could tell that I wanted to hit the bag or hit the things or play with the nunchucks or do whatever. He's like, nope, go teach the kids class, 1 to 2 hours. And I was like, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me. And so hundreds of times having to do that when he can sense my state was low, I got really good at managing my state and showing up for the kids, showing up for the teens, the adults, whoever it was that I had to lead. And I didn't realize at the time how much that was my training ground to staying calmer. Outside of just weight training and faith and all that, was teaching classes while I was pissed off or while I didn't sleep. So that helped me a ton. And so going back to your question is, from a martial arts standpoint, it's just subconscious. It clicks in. There's not fear. You're not even thinking of anything. It's just, you almost turn into a robot because everything you did that was repetitive just goes into it. Pretty similar to sports. Basketball, chest pass, bounce, but like all the basics, you're not thinking of it. These guys are cutting, doing everything. They're just in the zone and flow state. It's the equivalent in hand-to-hand combat, at least when somebody's trained. If somebody isn't, then it could be totally different, but you only are in fight mode, but you're also calm because you're almost playing chess as well. You could see the next step. You're not like hyperly stiff and like yelling. It's nothing like fighting that you see in public at the bar. The guy's like taking the shirt off, yelling and like, bring it on. Like real martial artists don't even make a sound. They're just the calmest, and they're basically playing chess with their body and controlling the situation. So that's what a lot of us experienced, and that's how a lot of us reacted towards violence, hand-to-hand combat. It was just our training would take over, and then you'd be calm. And after the fact, you realize, you're like, all right, you realize what you did or what somebody else did, but the people that have real professional training, that is the state that they're in. And I always found that very interesting because it correlated to sports. It correlated to if somebody trained at like a shooting range where they ran through the maneuvers and cleared a room. It just kicked in. You thought of nothing.
Just like,
and after the fact, you're just like, wow, we're literally like machines. This is amazing.
just like a super high level of conscientiousness, and I think that's beautiful. But on a quick fun note, kind of, you mentioned you watch the UFC. Do you have a favorite UFC fighter?
Yeah, George St. Pierre. Yeah, obviously he's retired, but I love George St. Pierre, GSP back in the day.
You know what's funny about that? When you were talking about, how real mixed martial artists like resort to, violence at the very last step, I was thinking of like, because I'm not the biggest UFC fan, but I'm, follow it loosely. But I was thinking of like George St. Pierre because he's always like so calm, so clean, very kind of dojo vibe. So
Yeah.
really funny that you brought up that point. But awesome note on there, kind of a bit of a parting note on your military days. What do you think was the most important lesson that you learned from during your time in service?
Great question. I would say working with different individuals, male, female, Muslims, gay, straight, just all different walks of life, and knowing how to meet them where they're at. And so I learned that from experience, seeing the good leaders and seeing the terrible leaders of examples of both. So I would see how he or she would interact with them and say, oh, that was interesting. That was good. They didn't embarrass her or him in front of everybody. Okay. This guy, cutthroat, we call this knife hand. They just yell at you in front of everybody, make an example of you. But not always the best, because that person, they could have just lost their dog, their grandma, got in a car wreck on the way to work. Like, you never know what somebody's going through. So embarrassing them in front of people, that could always end up in a worse trickle effect, which unknowingly they didn't realize they created. So I always would really pay attention to the best leaders and the worst leaders. And I do believe that it came from my childhood of trauma. I was always hyper aware, wondering, am I going to get hit? Is something going to be thrown at me? What is going on? I got good at sports and reading people in the military. So number one, I would say, is working with various people and knowing how to speak to them differently, not changing our personality, but just meeting them where they're at and then slowly building them up. So some people, they need your drill sergeant 24/7. Others, you can tell they're going through a lot. They need you to build them up, talk to them one-on-one. Some people, you just got to learn something about them personally, because a lot of people, they give up on that person. They say, man, he doesn't listen. He's such a slow learner. And I would always ask, what's his favorite thing to do? And they're like, I don't know. He just freaking sucks at marching. He can't shoot for shit. I'm like, I understand that. He sucks at these 5 things. We get it. What about him personally do you know? And a lot of the times people wouldn't know anything. I was like, that's why he's not listening to you. You're treating him like a number. And so I would approach people and learn about, hey, he likes dogs. He likes video games. She likes this. And they're like, wow, Johnson actually gives a damn. And then next thing you know, he's learning and getting better at the things he used to suck at. And they're like, what did you do? I had a conversation. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I had a conversation.
I spoke to him.
And then it started clicking, and I didn't make him nervous and uptight. And then we went back and did the same training that we all did. And then it started to click because he wasn't as stressed. And they're like, huh. And some people get it, some people didn't, but definitely was that working with various people and knowing how to lead and meet people where they're at.
I love that, and definitely say it louder for the teachers in the back to a little bit comment on the way our schooling system works these days. I'm sure teachers try their best, but I think a lot of times, unfortunately, in society, they take a blanket approach to try to teach something, when I think you have to really know what makes someone click. And then once they feel that you're on that level, kind of, you'll be amazed at the results. So really great that you got that experience. But, after the Army, you're thinking about what to do with your career, what to do with your life, even kind of, what were you thinking about in regards to career choices after your service?
Good question. So I knew that it was going to be coaching because I became a certified personal trainer at the age of 15. I'm in my 30s now, so I've been a trainer for a while.
You look great for in your 30s, by the way, I have to ask. I hope to kind of level be on that level when I'm older.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, just keep drinking spring water. Stay active while all your friends get drunk every day. Be the one guy in the circle that doesn't do all the drugs and alcohol.
Yep.
Well, yeah. So, basically, I just knew that my passion was to make a deeper impact. So in the U.S. Army, you have your main job, My main job was satellite communications. So essentially, you could be anywhere in the world, set up a satellite, give people internet, radio, commo, everything they need.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that is it's about 30% work. 70% of the time, you're waiting for an issue
Mm-hmm.
or a problem to solve. So during that time period, people would either sleep and we do different shifts. You would study, you do whatever with your free time. You'd work out. So all I would do was work out and study, work out and study. And what I was studying was mindset, psychology, fitness, and I was just getting better and better. And I would apply things that I would learn. So the other job that many people have in the military is it's volunteers that you don't get paid more for it is I did master fitness trainers. There's a lot of different courses you could do in the US Army besides your main job. So I became a certified master fitness trainer, which essentially gets male and female soldiers mission ready so they can be ready for deployment. So some people, they're in great shape, but mentally they're struggling. Some people, they got a knee injury playing basketball over the weekend and they gained 20 pounds. And now the Army's like, hey, you're not up to standards. You're height and weight.
Mm-hmm.
So I would help them to cut back down. So it was all mental and physical related. And I fell in love with that. But I knew I wanted to do it at scale with civilians and make a bigger impact. And so I was training athletes, soldiers, classmates, and all that. And I was training like the general public, but I knew that I wanted to make a deeper impact. So I was already coaching people in the Army. So I knew that the path was going to be to take advantage of this skill and of this opportunity and go further. And the number one way was I was always using social media. Like I'm by no means social media famous, but I was always cranking out content.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be the one driving in the car, just ranting on video. And everybody that knew me, they're like, why are you talking about all this personal stuff? And I said, it's not for you. And then a stranger would message me and say, dude, I don't know who you are, but I needed that. And the more that happened, I said, I got to keep cranking stuff out. Somebody needs this. Somebody needs this. And so I knew deep down that the Army was just a gateway into the bigger picture to give me more skills and experience that I needed and to continue my path in coaching.
So to have that impact, I think it's a beautiful purpose and a beautiful mission to pursue that. And speaking about personal fitness, I actually heard you say in another podcast about how, and I'm sure you kind of might have seen this with some of the clients or just general trendy topics, but a lot of people often go for fad diets or popular fitness trends instead of going for something sustainable. So on that note, why do you think people shoot for the moon right away instead of just going for baby steps and trying to build themselves up?
Great question. So what it is people, they have a lower attention span than ever and they have no patience.
Unfortunately.
So a low attention span and no patience leads to how fast can I do this?
Mm-hmm.
With fitness, they're like, all right, let me look up the top fitness guys. We got Kino Body. We got him. He says train 3 days a week. We got this guy. He says train 6. We got this guy says train 2. Then the guy's overwhelmed. Like, which one do I do? Each article and each video contradicts itself, but they're jumping from thing to thing. So the biggest reason is people's attention span is lower because they're just easily distracted. Apps, emails, just whatever trending topics. So they rarely are in a deep flow state doing deep work. That's more than like 5 minutes. And like one side it's funny to say that and hear that. The other side it's sad. The other side is crazy because at different time periods in life, people were at different areas of the threshold of attention span. But nowadays, because it's so low and because everybody's just wired for the quick fix, I'll put it this way. You could be on your couch for 48 hours and you could have Amazon or whatever app somebody wants to use, deliver your stuff, give them directions at the keys under the mat and bring it to you. You could literally stay on the couch for 2 days straight and have everything catered to you. Mm-hmm. And so like, that's the world that we live in. And they got Netflix, all these other apps. So people are wired for speed. They have less patience. They don't like do things that harness their own energy. So that's a huge reason. But because of that, when people can accept that and say, you know what? These things are good. They do help us to an extent, but let me make sure these things don't control me. Let me stop looking for the quick fix of this and that. Let me look at the person whose advice I'm taking. Did he just become rich last year? Now he's selling me a course? Or did he actually do it for a decade? And now has a mentorship program. So I really tell people to look at who's given the advice of the quick fix and see, do they live the lifestyle that they're actually teaching and preaching? So that's a huge takeaway is because nowadays just on social media, there's a lot of weird stuff and people are just selling false hopes like, oh, would you like passive income and a 6-pack? Click the link for the course in 6 weeks. And shut up.
So stuff doesn't work. But I'm really happy you brought that up because it's like a topic that I've been thinking about a ton because I think in one way, a lot of these big inventions or a lot of these innovations that make our lives easier came from, a lot of difficulty, say the generation behind us or kind of maybe a
Oh yeah,
generation behind that. But I think they had the hope that it would elevate society. But I think for whatever reason, people look at these new innovations and things that kind of go with or kind of cause us to have a lower attention span. I don't want to say cause us, but aid in the lower attention span in the sense that kind of they're like, oh, I could just that helps me out. I don't have to put in an effort. But instead, I think society would be much further. And I'm hoping people are getting smarter about this in the sense that technology is great and there's a lot of great advancements, but we have to use that to aid us while we're still kind of pursuing what we want to pursue relentlessly. And I think, unfortunately, right now people have used that to kind of replace a lot of our motivation. I think it has to aid our motivation. So I hope
yeah.
that's one thing that people get a lot smarter on, but I'm really happy that you brought that up. So really great note on there. On a personal note, I have to ask, what's your fitness routine?
Fitness routine. I wake up at 4. I drink water. I walk my dog, and then I either drive to the gym or I go run. So like this morning, walk my dog. Then I drove to the gym, and I'll hit the weights or machines and stuff for about an hour.
Hmm.
Then I'll head home, and then on the way home or when I get home, I'll do a lot of visualization. So I envision version 10.0, and this is always after a workout. It's way more effective because the mind is open.
Hmm.
But the fitness routine, honestly, I don't want to call myself crazy, but I create scenarios in my head. So I'll put it this way. This morning I did legs. During like the fourth set, I was like, you know what? I was out of breath on that. And then I imagine I'm like, my next date with my girlfriend, if somebody comes up and attack, am I in enough cardio shape? So tomorrow I'm gonna go run 4 miles. So I like create scenarios in my head to say, am I prepared for any situation? So now I like the aesthetics, I like endurance, speed, agility, and all that. But I also ask myself, can you protect everyone in this restaurant at any given moment? Or have you not done enough cardio or lifted enough or whatever you needed to perform and save somebody's life? So I run these scenarios in my
Hmm.
head, and it's always driven me. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but hey, sometimes it could help. You got to tap into the dark. So I just always prepare for life,
Hmm.
but I've always liked the big three: aesthetics, meaning how the physique looks, two, speed, and three, power.
Hmm.
So having all three, because people say you can only have one or you can only have two, you can be it all. You can run 10 miles, still lift heavy, and then still be able to swim good and
Hmm.
protect your family. So be that anomaly that can do it all, because you can do it all and be it all.
Yep. Yep. You're not crazy, my friend. I don't want to say I'm ashamed to admit, I guess now that I have someone that shares those ideas, but I also think about those ideas sometimes if I'm on the treadmill or if I'm tired, I'm trying to be like, oh, like what if you were in some league game batting in the bottom of the ninth and like you had to hit a home run? So I'll just kind of stick with that scenario for now. Maybe a few others that I imagine,
Oh
but you're
yeah.
not crazy, my friend. I share that with you. So I
Awesome.
appreciate you sharing some of that routine. Another topic I wanted to get into that I know you speak a lot about and are really involved in is mental health. And mental health is a
Yes.
big topic these days. And, I'm no expert, I'm no psychiatrist, so no one take this as advice from me, but I think that it's super, super overcomplicated these days, kind of regarding mental health and a lot of these solutions. And I think, in short, it's a lot more simple than people give it credit for. But in your opinion, why do you think a lot of people these days struggle with their mentality and mental health?
A huge reason, bouncing off what I mentioned earlier of attention span, is the story that they tell themselves, whatever story that they repetitively have in their mind. And what I mean by that is, if they got bullied, do they still speak to themselves the way other people used to speak to them? Where they say, let's just say a guy was bullied for being obese. The older he gets and the more in shape he is, he's still going to have that little voice feeling like the 12-year-old fat kid who was getting bullied. And he might feel insecure in the corporate setting, giving the presentation, even though
Hmm.
he has a nice suit on, he's in great shape. But in his head, if he hasn't worked on mental health, that'll pop in sometimes. And he thinks people are judging him, or she thinks they're judging her based off of previous bullying or whatever happened in the past. But I would say number one is, yes, the attention span, but also in combination of that is, what is the story that is always running in our mind and our subconscious? So growing up, I would always tell myself, this is part of my comeback story. People depend on me. I'm a badass motherfucker. Like, I would just talk to myself and hype myself through situations so I could show up better for others. And so on the flip side, many people don't live that way. They see things from a victim's mentality.
Hmm.
Everybody's been there to an extent, the highs or the lows. But some people in society, they say, I will never find love. I will never XYZ. And they give these direct statements that have so much power over them,
Mm-hmm.
where they don't realize they already place themselves in a box, or they put a ceiling on themselves. So their goal, dreams, and aspirations used to be up here. They got opinions from other people. Yeah, I don't know if you should take this path. Yeah, Jimmy tried it, didn't work for him. Yeah, I don't know. Hey, you're this or you're that or blah, blah. Like they hear all this stuff, and next thing you know, their goals diminished,
Mm-hmm.
and then they begin to settle. But what I challenge people to do is really look at who is giving you that negative advice. Who is that person? And I'm not telling people to cut off everybody, but really look at their life. Not in a judgmental way. We're just looking at hard facts.
Mm-hmm.
Start with family. If a family's like, yeah, I don't think you should go this path or that path, usually they don't have any experience or little to no experience in that field. So like when I was saying that I was going to be a life coach, people just laughed. What are you going to be, the next Tony Robbins? Like I would just hear everything. And nowadays, those same people, a lot of their parents, coworkers, exes, whoever I've worked with, and they see their transformation videos where like he was drinking for X amount of years, she was suicidal, and they bounce back and are in a better headspace. So just letting that fuel you. And I'm bringing up these examples because if somebody can improve their current story that they're telling themselves, and also really assess their circle, who is saying what? When you say, I want to pursue XYZ, is the person you're saying it to excited, supportive? Are they laughing? Are they saying little slick side comments that seems funny at first, but after a while just irritates you? What exactly is their response?
Mm-hmm.
So assessing your circle, because who is in your environment, whether that's digitally or in person, can dictate your story as well. Because people start to question themselves because Uncle Jimmy said this, and like Uncle Jimmy gave up on his goals for 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He keeps talking about his glory days in high school. It's like he hasn't done since then.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, are you really going to allow Uncle Jimmy to diminish your goals? And I'm using that as an example because everybody has somebody in their family that just always has something negative to say. But the majority of the time, the only reason it is because they see your potential.
Mm-hmm.
So the reminder to anybody is, if negative opinions are always hitting you, take a breather, take a step back, assess the person, and ask yourself, if I take his or her advice, will I end up like them? And do I want to end up like them? Usually it's no. And then you can zoom out and say, we're not trying to argue or cause a scene. We're just saying, how long have I allowed this person to dictate the story I tell myself? Because sometimes people's story is not even their story. It's just some preconceived notion somebody else placed onto them, and they've just been running this loop in their head that came from somebody else. So I love helping people identify that and say, is that your story or somebody else's? And then seeing how they could snap out of it and then write out your full story. Like, who are you? What did you overcome? And technically, everything you've already overcame and overcome is making you undefeated. So if you look at it in a sports sense, you're 500-0 or 1023-0 because you're still alive, you're still blessed. So you've been through a lot. So technically, you're still here. So you're undefeated. So let's keep it pushing and let's keep rolling.
For sure. I actually love one of the last points you brought up there regarding a story. And I think something that's been helping me out personally, and maybe this can help someone else out too, is a lot of times if you're going through some difficulty, obviously people go through those highs and the lows, but something that's been helping me a lot is reading. And I know there's a ton of different books out there, a ton of different categories, but if someone came to me and asked me, what do you think is the best type of book to read for, life or business or whatever, I'll just tell them stories. Because I think while there's a lot of self-help books, a lot of great business books out there, I think the one thing that I've really taken away a lot from stories and really resonate with a lot what from you said is when you read stories and you see the kind of lives people go through, you start to view challenges in your own life as just kind of these roadblocks. And you start to realize that life is just kind of this really long book. And at the end, you're the author. It's not going to be perfect, but you dictate how these chapters go. So I just add that one on. If anyone can relate to that or think that's useful for them, would be a great thing. But
100%.
On another note, one of the things that you mentioned was kind of a lot of people have a lot of trauma, and a lot of times, it's hard. And I think certain people are predisposed to, I'll say, certain behaviors, but I think it always comes down to a choice. But, I'm sure you've kind of seen this before. A lot of people say they might use their pain as their fuel. Kind of, in your opinion, after working with a lot of clients, do you think using pain as fuel is sustainable?
It's 50-50. What I mean by that is my younger version, my teenage version of me ran off of pain and anger. I was a nice person to everybody, but internally, I fell in love with the quote unquote dark side because I knew that's what got me this body. That's what got me this confidence. That's what got me the skills of public speaking. That's what got me XYZ. But then there's a shift. Once you're able to push pride and ego aside, especially as men, then you can see, you know what? There's been some times where I said some slick stuff and I didn't mean it in an angry way, but I was in that zone like, come on, don't be a little bitch.
That
Like,
could have been
you can't
better.
speak to everybody that way. So yeah. So there's going to be a shift where somebody has life experience and wisdom that they realize that they can tap into the pain when needed during a workout, when they have to send 5 more emails, when it's Thursday night at 11 p.m., they're drained and they're just ready for the weekend to sleep. And they say, I still have to finish this project. Our normal version can't get it done right the way that we want to. So I always challenge people to see it in a different light and say, do I have an alter ego? If not, I would challenge people to create one. Many people, they have one because it came from sports. They have a nickname. Maybe they hated their name growing up. They're like, Dad, why'd you call me Derek? Why'd you call me Daniel? Like, this is such a generic name. Why didn't you call me this? It has some energy to it. And they're like, what are you talking about? But if somebody relates to that, they can use whatever nickname they gave themselves or somebody else gave them to tap into that version when they need to. So that could be you tapping into the pain, the dark side, the fuel, whatever you want to call it. And if we look at things from a macro level, we could look at Kobe Bryant. Yeah, Black Mamba. Kobe in interviews and as a husband and a father was just calm, positive guy. Black Mamba would destroy anybody on the court. You have performers like Michael Jackson. People, no matter how they feel, they can respect him as a performer. In interviews, was very timid, very shy. So we could look at different people that crush it in their field, and we start to see a lot of them had an alter ego. They had to tap into that version when it came to game time, sales time, whatever their situation was. So going back to the 50-50 is, do you live in that state? Have you pushed people away in that state? And most importantly, can you control that state? It should be like a light switch. So in the gym, I can flip on a light switch without music on or anything. I can just do something with my eye. Like I'll move my eyes, I think of a thought and I get chills and then I just go harder. And the same thing, if I'm tired and don't feel like doing something, I can change my state within 10 seconds and show up to the call, to the meeting, to the interview, whatever's happening, and say, you know what, they need this, she needs this, whoever. And so having that control is everything. So no, it's not sustainable to live in it, but yes, it's sustainable when somebody can control that energy. So that way they're not living in that state all the time and pushing everybody away, saying, I don't need everyone. So on a big picture, here's a perfect example. The past 2 years, the alpha male red pill thing has been very popular, to each their own, but there is a negative side to it, that a lot of young men have lived in this angry state. Mom did this, dad did this, my ex did that, and they're just living in this angry state. And then they realize that they're miserable, all single, can't keep a relationship to save their life. But the reason why is because they're always running off anger. Whoever screwed them over, whoever hurt them. So like getting in shape, that's great. Making money, hey, that's great. Getting skill sets, yeah, that's great. But if somebody doesn't have emotional maturity and emotional awareness, then they're going to realize they're going to be miserable. So having that ability to come back down and resetting is everything. So going back to the 50-50, you do need both, but being able to tap into that when needed. So the final example is if somebody can relate to having a family member or maybe a friend's father or whoever was highly successful, beautiful house, beautiful family, had it all, but he just always seemed angry and miserable, or she did, whoever the example was. Guarantee you they don't have good self-awareness or self-control. They might crush it in business or whatever they do, but the family feels neglected, the wife, the husband, they're just like, all right, you're amazing at this, but you missed 15 ball games. You forgot his birthday. You did like the basic family human interaction thing they miss because they live in that state. And maybe he or she was running off that anger and fuel for way too long where they couldn't tap out of it anymore. So I just like to use these different perspectives because somebody might relate to one, but can you harness that energy to your advantage? And do you know how to turn it off? Don't ever fully get rid of it because you can use it, but do you know how to turn it on and off like a light switch? That's the ultimate goal.
Got it. That's a really interesting way of putting it. And now that you mentioned it, it's not something I noticed about a lot of these big figures, but now that you're saying it, it's like I can remember Kobe being up 2-0 in the 2009 finals. He's like, I have nothing to smile about. Job's not finished, or kind of a lot of these other figures. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But on some parting notes here, you've accomplished a lot. You've been a really successful life coach, have served us. Again, thanks for your service. Sorry if
I
I keep
appreciate
sorry if I keep
it. No
bothering
worries,
you
no
with
worries.
that. But knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
I would honestly just tell him to keep pushing through this and stick to your passion.
Hmm.
Keep pushing through this and stick to your passion. And last but not least, keep your faith strong. Keep your faith strong, especially in the darkness, because you're still alive. It could be worse. Somebody has it worse and they would legitimately kill to be in your situation. So this is happening for you, not to you. Keep your faith strong and just keep pushing through it because it'll all soon make sense.
Yep.
And even in the moment, somebody might be like, sounds great, but if you just stick to it, something's going to happen. A light bulb's going to go off. You're going to meet somebody. Some scenario is going to happen. I'd be like, wow, if I would have went this path, I would have been a totally different person. So I love hearing people's experiences and stories when it just clicks.
Hmm.
And they're like, that was the pivot point. I could have went down or I kept going up.
Yep. Deep advice there for sure. And on a parting note, and it was the last question, I think you'll really like this, but Derick, if say for example, your life was turned into a movie, what actor would play you?
What actor would play me? Huh. That's interesting. Honestly, I don't know because most actors are way older than me that I like. I'm not sure, but it would have to be somebody that could relate to the story because then
Love
they
that.
could emulate that.
God, I think that's a fair answer. And maybe if we, down the line, if I am able to do something like this in person, we'll pick up with that question and we'll go from there. But
Awesome.
Derick, it's been an
Sounds
absolute
good.
blast, and thanks so much for taking the time to come on the podcast.
I appreciate it, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Derick Johnson. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.